Hi everyone, I hope you all are doing great. So recently I gave a Capgemini interview for a senior front-end role position with around 20 LPA of package. And in this video, I am going to be sharing my complete interview experience. I'll walk you through the exact question that were asked to me, including JavaScript, React, and logic-based question. So if you are preparing for a front-end or MERN stack interviews, this video is going to be really helpful for you. I'll also share what companies are actually expecting from the candidate, because let's say if someone has asked you a question like what is closure, and if you are just replying giving them a definition based answer or theoretical, so they might can follow up with like you should write a code for that as well, or you can tell them the real world application of closure. So those could be the follow up questions, and similarly in other questions as well. So in this video we are going to be discussing those things in the detail, so make sure to watch the video till the end and let's get started. So starting with the round one, which was L1 round, and this round mainly focused on JavaScript, React, and logic-based questions. And if I tell you about the difficulty level, it was not extremely hard, but they were checking basically how clear your fundamentals are and how you explain the things. So let's start with this round only. So these were the JavaScript questions which they basically asked me one by one. So first question was basically what is the difference between the deep copy and shallow copy. And in this question they have just asked me the definition of both deep copy and shallow copy. So I explained them in the detail and by giving the example as well. So this question was good, and they were fine with my answer. So this was the first question, and after that they asked me closures in JavaScript. And in this question, like firstly they asked me what are closures. So I basically answered them, basic definition of closure, how closure works. But then their follow-up question was like, can you write down the basic example of closure? So I also wrote down the basic example. Like I created a function called say hello, and in the outer scope I defined a variable and then used it in the inner scope. So they were also fine with my answer, and interviewer was quite happy, like he was able to understand that I know this concept. So yeah, so these were the second question, like closures in JavaScript. Then after they also gave another follow-up question, like can I tell them what could be the practical use case of closure. So I give them the use case, like if you want to create a private variable, so closures are very helpful. So they were fine with that. Now the third question was what is the difference between Promise.all and Promise.race. Now this was a quite simple question, so they were just expecting the definitions of that. So I gave them a basic definition of that, like Promise.all means, let's say we have got three promises in the array, and it waits until all three promises are successful, or you can say resolved. And in the Promise.race, the first one which gave the answer first, like that will be the main. So this was also I gave the proper answer, and they were fine with that. Now the fourth question in JavaScript they asked was how to stop an API call. So in this question actually I was forgetting initially, then I remembered there is something called abort controller. So I was not able to answer them properly regarding this because I was skipping that. But yeah, I gave them a basic detail about it, like we basically use abort controller to stop the API call which is in pending state. So then interview asked me like can I elaborate more on that. So I told them I'm skipping the concept. So then he was like, let's move on to the next question. Then they asked me about this was the fifth question, by the way, what is hoisting and what are the different types of variable in JavaScript. Now this question I know properly, so I explained them in detail, and interviewer was really impressed. So in hoisting I explained bit by bit how it works, and how in the case of var it works, and how in let and const before from the start of the code till the we have assigned the variable, there is something called TDZ, temporal dead zone. So I explained them all those things, so he was pretty happy with my answer. Fifth, hoisting and types of variable like let, const and var, and I also explained how hoisting works in all these three variables and what are the different advantage of using let and const and var. So yeah, this question was really good. Now the sixth question, and this was the final question in JavaScript. which interviewer asked me like what is throttling in JavaScript. So this question as well I was able to answer properly. Like basically I didn't give the definition, I explained them through the scenario. Let's say we are having a frequent like if we want to do something after a certain interval regularly, so for that we can use the throttling, or if we want to limit the rate, we want to apply the rate limiting, so then we can use throttling. So I gave them the proper answer and he was happy. But like in the sixth question, like in this interview they didn't ask me, but usually what happen is after the throttling definition they ask us to implement the basic polyfill of throttling. So if you are preparing for interview, you should know the polyfill of throttling as well. Like let's say if you don't have a throttling function, how you will implement yourself. So I think you should practice that, like throttling, debouncing. These are the basic polyfills. Like in future videos I will be discussing that, but yeah, you can keep in mind, it will be really helpful for you. So yeah, so these were the JavaScript question. Now move to the next topic. Now let's move to the second part of the interview, which was React based questions. So in React they basically asked me these 4 questions which are visible on the screen. So we will be going one by one. So the first question they asked me was, what is the difference between useMemo and useCallback? So I gave them the proper answer, like useMemo is used for the caching of the result, and useCallback is used for the caching of a function. Now here's the catch, like basically interviewer start with this normal question, useMemo and useCallback, and most of the students know the definition, but after that they follow up again and again. Basically they ask, can you explain more about the concept of caching? Then I explained that, and their second follow-up was, let's say, is the caching really helpful in all the scenarios, or in some scenarios it is not good for performance as well? So that as well I answered, because let's say if we have too much data, so we can't cache it, because cache memory also has a limit. So if we have a lot of data and which is changing frequently, so in those cases caching is not good. So I explained them. So and these were the 2 follow-up questions, and the third follow-up question, like which they didn't ask me in the interview, but if you are appearing in the interview, they could ask you like, can you write down how useMemo works, and can you give the example of use callback hook as well? So this is the third follow-up question which could be asked. Now let's say even if you have answered this as well, now after that they also ask you, can you write down the custom hook by yourself, how useMemo will work, or how use callback will work. Like can you implement the basic details of this by yourself if you don't have the hook? So they can ask that as well. So now, like, this is the one of most important question in React, and it comes in I think around even 70% interviews which I have given. Like in March itself I have given around 30 interviews. So this is the one of most frequently asked questions. So you can prepare in detail this question, and this will really impress the interviewer if you can answer this properly. Now let's move to the second question, which was explain context API and write down the basic structure. Now this was fairly simple. I started with the state management or at the component level by using use state hook, and then let's say if we have if we want to have a central state, and if we want to if we don't want to use too much use state hook, so and if we want to communicate state between components, so for that we can use context API. So I explained them fairly well, and I also wrote down the basic structure and how it works. So yeah, this was a pretty simple question, but you should practice this very well, because sometimes students know how Redux work, how state works, but context API is not used too much in like applications. So but it is asked in interview, so you should have a clear idea about it. So yeah, this was the second question, and I answered this properly. And the third question was it was also a pretty simple question, like what is useEffect dependency array and how it affects the rendering. Now I answered them properly. Firstly I explained them in very short how useEffect works and what is the benefit of useEffect hook, and after that I explained, like in the dependency array, whatever states we have, when those states change, our component re-renders again. So those things I told them, but you have to be concise, like you don't have to answer all the things, like just keep it to the topic, like whatever they have asked, only answer that. If they want they can follow up as well, but don't give too much theory to themselves, because then they can cross question a lot. So you should be aware of that, because in couple of interviews I have done the same mistake. Let's say if they asked me virtual DOM, so I have explained everything in the theory, so then they are able to ask more questions. So you should not do that. Just keep whatever they have asked, only answer that. So this was the third question. And fourth was, what are React portals? So this was also a pretty simple question answer. So I also answered this very well, how like what are React portals and what are the applications of React portals. Let's say you want to show the pop-up which is not in the component layer, which is like above the component and which could be independent. So in those case we use React portals. So I also answered this fairly well. So interviewer was quite happy with that. So yeah, this was the last question in the React, and in React I answered almost all questions properly, so they were pretty fine with that, my React skills. So yeah, this was the second portion. Now let's move to the third portion, which was they asked me logical question. Now if you could see, they only asked me one question, which was like, can I flatten this nested array? Now if you could see the array in the left side, it is a nested array. Like we have three items in the top, then we have array, and then three items, and again then we have sub array of that. So this is a kind of nested array. Now what they asked me was initially, can you flatten this array using a method? So I use the flat method, and let's say if we don't know the how much nesting we have, so we can use infinity as well, so that it will flatten the whole array. Doesn't matter how much nesting we have in the array. So initially I used this method and it was working fine. Now the interviewer follow-up question was like, in this you have used the method. Let's say if the method is not available, then what you should do? Now how you will do? So in that case I wrote my custom function and using the recursion, because if you could see here, you can follow up the recursion, because let's say here we have the first array, then again we have the second. So it is like using recursion you can easily flatten this array. So I used that and I wrote the function and it was working fine. So interviewer was fine with my answer. So you should practice these sort of type of questions. Like there were around 20 to 30 questions. I also be discussing in this channel as well these questions. So yeah, you should prepare around 20 to 30 questions only, because sometimes same questions repeat. Now you can also check on internet, this flatten the nested array question have been asked in almost a lot of interviews. So yeah, this is the important question which you should know. So yeah, these were the questions they have asked, like the three sections I told you: JavaScript, React, and this logic based question. Now if I tell you the what are the key takeaways for me, first thing, they are focusing more on the fundamental clarity. Like they want to know, like the concept of promises, event loop, and closures and hoisting very well, and this keyword or how JavaScript engine works. So they want to know this first. Like if you are skipping some code, or skipping some definition, so they are not too much worry about that, but they want to just make sure you know the concepts really well. First thing is that. Now second thing is, like in the this logic based question, what they want to know is, you have just to know, not just practiced it and just wrote the answer. You should know the logic behind it, how it's working, and how you can implement it in the real world if you gave such scenarios. So yeah, you should practice around 30 to 40 questions, and in upcoming videos I will be also sharing what questions could be there, because I have researched on the internet as well, and whatever interviews I have given, so I have prepared a list. So I will be sharing with you that soon, so you can just practice that. Like sometimes we prepare 500 question, 1000 question, that doesn't matter, because 30 to 40 questions expertise is more than enough for the at least mid-level interviews. I'm not talking about FANG, but mid-level interviews. Now here the one more thing which is really helpful is communicate clearly. Like in the initial interviews myself, I also lacked that communication skill. Sometimes I were over explaining, sometimes I was not able to properly explain. But interview by interview I just got better and better. Like right now also I'm learning, and the main purpose I was making YouTube video as well, only this, because so I can improve my communication and I can also share my knowledge and experiences which could help you. So yeah, that is the reason. So communication is the key. Even if you know the half answer, but if you are able to communicate your thoughts, so that will be really helpful, at least for the interview part. So yeah, this is the fourth point you should remember. And just last point, stay calm and confident. Like confidence, like you don't have to be overconfident and rude, but just be confident with your answers. even if they are doing the cross questioning, you should be confident about it. Like, it really helps. Interviewer wants a confident candidate, not a underconfident candidate who knows but he has doubt in himself. So nobody wants that, so you should be confident. So yeah, these are the couple of learnings. So if you have any question regarding this interview, so you can comment down below. And like, this is the first interview experience I have shared. In future I will be sharing more experiences as well. So you can subscribe to the channel, and you can also like the video if you find it helpful. So thank you so much.